From the European Parliament in Brussels, this is Raw Politics. Thank you for joining us tonight, and this is what we have for you on the program. People Power. 70,000 protesters in Brussels demand climate action as student strikes grow across Europe. Red Scarves, the new movement in France and what it means for the Yellow Vests, and Emmanuel Macron. EU ultimatum. Venezuela's president ignores a threat from 4 European nations, calling them insolent. Forced paternity. The EU moves to make 10 days leave mandatory for companies employing new fathers in Europe. And repeating history. Politicians and protesters get dramatic to warn against a hard border in Northern Ireland. It is time to meet our panelists this evening. First, we have Brian McGuire. He's a journalist and broadcaster with Euractiv. Brian, good to see you again. Which of these stories are you watching closely?
Venezuela. This is a real test for Europe's foreign policy.
All right, indeed it is. Big news today. Also joining us today is Grégoire Laurie. He is a Euronews correspondent, and he's covering environmental issues for Euronews. So, Grégoire, which of the stories are you watching?
The Red Scarves. I'm French.
You are from France, yeah.
So I'm looking what's happening in my country, and it's an interesting movement with the Yellow Vest.
Yeah, it is the latest twist in Emmanuel Macron's problems these days. And also joining us is Bas Eickhout. He's a Dutch MEP who sits with the Greens EFA group. What about you, Bas?
Good evening. Well, for me, it's the climate marches. Finally, we now see really people turning out in the streets and asking for climate action, which indeed politicians have been waiting too long for.
Yeah, the numbers have been impressive, and that is exactly where we are beginning our program tonight. Because yesterday may have been cold and rainy here in Brussels, but that did not stop demonstrators from taking to the streets to demand climate change action. At least 70,000 people marched their way through the Belgian capital, demanding the Belgian government and the European Union step up the fight against climate change. Extra trains were brought in to shuttle protesters to the march. The demonstration comes just 4 months before national and European elections. And here is what one protester had to say.
I'm concerned about the climate, that's why I'm here. And I think the politicians could do a lot more, and also the society as a whole could do a lot more, because you're now telling all the things, yes, we're doing a lot, but in fact you're doing not that much. They could do a lot more. Public transport could be improved, so less people, if they take a car, could take public transport.
Well, climate protests have stretched across Europe. France joined in hundreds of protests organized around the country yesterday as well. And it comes after tens of thousands of students cut class on Friday to protest climate inaction. In Germany, students as well in more than 50 cities took part. In Switzerland, 15 cities and towns saw school strikes. And all in all, it's estimated that more than 60,000 students participated, and that is the highest number yet. All right, so, you know, these climate protests that we're seeing, they are really very high numbers. Is this the critical mass that we have been waiting for in climate change? Grégoire, you've been covering environmental issues. Is this the critical mass?
I'm not sure it's the critical mass, but it's the repetition of all these protests that could create a massive action. Now we have to see if the students will keep going on and if the people will keep going on streets. But it's a first signal, and 4 months before the European elections, I think politicians have to listen to what is happening in the streets now.
I think there is that question, you know, what politicians have to listen to. Bas, I mean, they're talking to politicians. But apart from them coming out to the streets and saying, we care about the environment and we want you to do something, is there a problem of messaging, of focus, of what do they want and who are they asking that change from?
I don't think so. I mean, what was very interesting here in Belgium, when you had the students in the street, then at a certain moment, the Minister of Environment from the Flemish government was saying, I will invite the schoolers to my office and I will talk to them. And their reply was, well, you don't need to talk to us. We just want you to do action. And I think politicians know very well what they should be doing, but they just don't dare to do it because there's a lot of industrial forces that, of course, are putting a brake on any climate action. So we know what the politicians can do. And I think what you see here is that politicians have been talking about climate change for many years. Like in France, President Macron is talking about climate change since Paris, so to say. But everyone is talking about it, and now people are going to the street to say, OK, then also act on it. And I think that is what we're asking, and the politicians know very well what to do. And that's, of course, dealing with transport, dealing with industry, let them pay for CO2 pollution. The solutions are there, but you need You need political action.
So, okay, what will it take for politicians to shrug off that pressure from industry?
Well, that's the good question. I think in the end, you have to listen less to that industrial. I mean, every country, the industry
Easy to say, though.
Yeah, easy to say, but it's also like the industry is always saying, no, you can't do it because then I will go to my neighbor country. But if you now see in every country, you see this action, it's very clear we need a European solution. So in that sense that the protesters are turning to Europe, okay, let's do that. But then we need to improve our targets. If you see what Europe has adopted, it's climate change policies that were agreed in 2014, those targets. So you need an update of that, and we need far stronger action on, for example, the car industry, which is still being protected in Germany. So there's a lot of issues where you know what you can do, but the only thing we need is politicians that dare to step up to the voices of industry.
And on the other, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I was saying just on this, politicians who don't dare to step up are going to be paying the price. We saw this in Germany, we saw this in the Bavarian elections and in the Belgian local elections as well. Parties which had stronger green credentials did much better. And the idea that immigration was the big thing in Bavaria, we saw it just wasn't. It was way down as fourth place on the agenda.
Sure, yeah.
And green issues were much higher. It's not the tipping point, but it's certainly a moment of awakening.
And I think what is interesting here is we're seeing the demographics. We have a lot of students. I mean, yes, in the past we see in various revolutions and movements in the world, it's always students. But here it's across Europe. It's the most number of students, young high school students that we've seen. What do you see this bringing into the climate change debate?
It's interesting. Yesterday, you could see families in the march in Brussels. And that, I think, is an interesting point. So these children, they will think globally, they will think climate change. So
they know what they're fighting for, do they?
At least they
know what they're fighting against. I don't know if they know what they're fighting for.
Okay.
And having the young with you has always been a major force. I mean, look at the past in all the major manifestations. May 68, in France, of course, but in other parts of the world, when the students get on the streets, there's something happening in the years after, in the month after, it depends, but I think it's a trend we have to look for.
And we see it also for the success of the Green parties. It's mainly young voters that are really making the Green parties grow. And of course, you see the other parties reacting to that. They start realizing.
It's interesting the kind of influence that these young people are having on movements and issues. Now, the student protest, it started last year, actually, when this one teen activist, her name is Greta Thunberg, skipped class to demonstrate outside the Swedish parliament. Now, she has become a star since then, and she spoke at Davos last week. Let's take a look.
But I don't want your hope. I don't want you to be hopeful. I want you to panic. I want you to feel the fear I feel every day. And then I want you to act. I want you to act as if you would in a crisis. I want you to act as if the house was on fire. Because it is.
And that was a powerful statement from this 15-year-old, from Greta. Was this movement looking for a symbol like her, that she became a star like this?
I don't know the movement was looking for a symbol like this, but what she represents is something that's very tangible in schools. My kids are a little younger than her. They talk about the environment. My youngest daughter wrote a pamphlet about the environment at 9 years old without being asked to, because she spoke exactly the same words that Greta spoke as well. So this is really something which is not just taught them in school, but which they see it in the news. They are concerned about things like Volkswagen, these issues. For children to be talking about this at this level with such intensity is something exceptional.
Do they blame the adults? Do they feel like the adults?
They do. If I dare look at a Volkswagen car to purchase that, I say, no, Daddy, we can't do that. They hear the snapshots, they hear the headlines, they have a very strong consciousness. Like I said earlier, they don't necessarily know what the solution is, but they know what they're against.
So do you think that this generational change is similar to what happened with, I guess, behavior towards smoking, or the stigma attached to climate change? Do you think it's now cool to care about the environment, and therefore it could possibly change lifestyle and behavior?
I'm not sure it's cool yet, but I do think that for a lot of schoolers, they really feel that something needs to happen. And indeed, they look a bit at their parents and what have you been doing? And I think that question, of course, becomes more and more prominent also to them. So whether it's cool or not, I think the language they're speaking they shake up also the political system, because it's nice in Davos where everyone is always talking about, oh, we want to listen to each other and let's find a compromise. And then she comes in and says, I don't want you to listen, I want you to panic. And that is very important, because I think that is waking up politicians in the end, so that the action will follow. But whether it's cool, I think people are just really feeling that something needs to change. And that's an urgency they feel, which they are bringing across.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting when children or young people are actually calling for action, when your kids say, don't look at that Volkswagen car. And, young people, they are calling for climate action in a variety of different ways, including now by signing a manifesto and making a pledge. Alex Morgan and our team at theCUBE have been looking at this. Alex.
Well, Tessa, when it comes to counting the days, really, when we've not got a protest going on at the moment, that seems to be the challenging thing. Look at this. Over the weekend, we had Brussels. 70,000 people estimated to have gone to the streets of the Belgian capital. Also across France as well, in Paris, signs and placards demanding action. But then last Friday, look at this, Germany. A lot of young people there. This is Greenpeace Germany, sort of, with a bit of a controversial headline saying just naive youth. No, this could be the movement that changes things. Then, of course, as well as that, as I say, you had France, you've also had people in Austria. Now, what is underlying all this? It seems to be an awakening, if you like, on social media, especially among younger people. And we're not just talking about Europe. Let me bring you up the voice of Alexandria. She protests outside the UN General Headquarters. This is her message.
I've been striking every Friday at the United Nations headquarters in solidarity with Greta Thunberg. This past year, I saw Greta speak at COP24 in Poland, and after I'd seen how the world leaders had failed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, I got mad.
She got mad, and crucially, she goes on to say to us, we were having a little exchanging messages, she says, I can't vote, and by the time I can vote, she says it could be too late. That is why she is there protesting. She also is calling for a nationwide shutdown of schools in America in March to mirror the actions of Greta Thunberg, obviously, who was there in Sweden, calling for action. Indeed, these signs even reminiscent, of course, of those held by Greta when she was outside the Swedish parliament week after week after week. We are getting this sense that the youth voice, on social anyway, is waking up. Let me just show you something a bit interesting. I think this is a bit different, an interesting take on all this, and that is going after governments. You were talking there earlier about the influence of industry. Well, look at this. This is a manifesto. It's a French manifesto. It's put together by students, and it's not directed at governments. It is directed at companies wanting to hire the very best French students. And in it, in effect, it says, if you want to hire us, you have to change your policies. Now, those behind it say that it's basically talking to the people with real power. Let me just give you what the organizer said to me earlier on.
If you want to recruit us, then you have to take care of how you are taking into account the environment. So we believe that most of the time companies have more influence than governments.
Most of the time, companies have more influence than governments. I think that chimes a little bit with what you were saying on the panel earlier. But I had to be, you had to ask that question. Are students really going to turn down jobs with the top companies because of their environmental records? Are young people really at that stage? Well, this is the answer I got to that question.
So once you've understood that, it's very natural to say, well, I'm not going to work 5 days a week from 8 to 6 to, just have 4 degrees global warming. Even if you give me money, that's just not good for my future.
Not good for my future. The idea that salaries are now not just what young people are thinking about. You're getting a sense here that as more and more students, estimated to be approaching 30,000 now across countries, have signed up to that manifesto. The idea that calls for action, not just from governments, but from industry too, are growing.
All right, thank you for that, Alex and our team in theCUBE. I think that is an interesting point. We were talking about this earlier in the show, that, now this is a noble pursuit, but there could be economic consequences. I mean, they're targeting companies. You were talking about how difficult it is to target industry. Do you think this could work? You sacrifice your choice of company just because they don't have a good environmental record. Could this work?
Why not? Let's have a try. We'll see. And you see, within the family, the children are starting to change their parents' mind. I mean, you're not watching to Volkswagen right now, so why not within a company try to move something? We'll see. it's courageous. With so much unemployment in Europe, it's courageous. But if no one is ringing the bell, nothing will happen, I guess.
Yeah, it's like almost like a personal sacrifice. What do you think about this effort? Do you think that this will actually
Well, I think
something?
also more and more you have the choice, right? I mean, maybe in the old days you had only the fossil economy, the fossil fuels economy. You now more and more have a choice for which company to work. And it's not only anymore that you have to go for the big industry who is in fossil fuels. You have the alternatives there. Like in Germany, there are more people employed now in renewable energy than in fossil energy. So you see that more and more you have that choice. So then also you can say, as a powerful young force, to say, well, then I will only go to the renewable industry and not to the fossil industry. And companies like Shell, for example, in the Netherlands are getting nervous of that because they do see that it becomes a problem.
This is their future pool of talent. Would you actually encourage your children, or, you know, he was saying there's a lot of unemployment. Would you actually encourage your children to do that?
I think you need to teach children that they can make change from within.
Okay.
That companies, for example, that would not have necessarily be seen as a green company, Coca-Cola, for example. Whatever you think of Coca-Cola products, how they change their whole supply chain from within the company all the way through is really quite extraordinary. How they deal with the circular economy. The commentator was right, is that these companies are more influential than government. Government can set the target, but it's big companies that drive the change through the supply chain into smaller companies that really make a big difference in what we can do with climate change. So yes, go into whichever company you want to do, but make the change from within.
Well, speaking of companies and industry that have impact on climate change, let's go to Germany because, you know, climate change, it is here to stay. And in Germany, there is a standoff. Let's take a look. Welcome to Germany. A car-obsessed country and a haven for petrol heads, thanks to the nation's famous autobahns, which have no speed limits. But all that could be about to change. A slim majority of Germans now back setting maximum speed limits on the country's highways to help in the battle against climate change. But not so fast. Not everyone is on board with the plans. Transport Minister Andreas Scheuer has come out against imposing speed limits. It's a sign of a government caught between protecting its vital car industry and catching up with climate change. Well, it seems maybe Germany's getting a bit more ambitious. They also want to be coal-free by 2038. I think that's the latest. So what do you think? Speed limits on the Autobahn.
Speed limits, anything that touches the car industry in Germany, impacts on political funding, and the grip that the car industry has on politics in Germany is really astonishing. So they've got to be super sensitive. It's not just about doing the right thing for industry. It's really about pleasing people that are funding political parties. That's a separate game.
Okay, well, now it seems that Germans are backing the speed limits. Maybe, no, he's doubtful. He's doubtful. All right,
it's
a lot more.
Slowly. I mean, cars and Germany remains a separate issue.
All right, we'll leave it at that for now. Well, a lot more coming up on Oral Politics. Should paternity leave be mandatory? Why the EU is encouraging men to stay home with the kids. Plus, in the midst of a political crisis in Venezuela, we ask, can the EU really be a global power broker? Do stay with us. Welcome back to Raw Politics. Nicolas Maduro, he is responding to an ultimatum from 4 European countries and a statement from the EU. The Venezuelan president says he will not bow to demands to call fresh elections, and he called the current political crisis a U.S.-led coup. Opposition leader Juan Guaido declared himself interim president last week amid massive anti-government protests, and the move was supported by several world leaders, including Donald Trump. The UK, Germany, France, and Spain then issued an ultimatum saying that Maduro must call elections within 8 days or they will recognize Guaido's claim to the presidency. Meanwhile, the EU issued its own statement, which was read aloud at the UN by the British Minister of State for Europe and the Americas. Let's take a look at this.
The EU strongly calls for the urgent holding of free, transparent and credible presidential elections in accordance with internationally democratic standards and the Venezuelan constitutional order. In the absence of an announcement on the organization of fresh elections with the necessary guarantees over the next days, the EU will take further actions, including on the issue of recognition of the country's leadership in line with Article 233 of the Venezuelan Constitution.
All right, joining us now in the studio to discuss this is Ana Gomes, a Portuguese MEP with the SND Group. Also joining us for this panel is Mark Demismaker, a Belgian MEP with the ECR Group. And still with us is Brian McGuire, journalist and broadcaster from Euractiv. All right, let's talk about the EU's reaction. And I'll start with you. Does the EU's reaction have any teeth at all, have any clout at all?
I think it does. It also shows we're not in regime change for the sake of regime change. That is something that the Venezuelan people, it's up to them, and they are actually saying that they need it. But it does because it gives indeed this opportunity for elections to be announced. But of course it has to be credible elections, organized by the UN, under international supervision, not a la Maduro elections that lead to this crisis and that show the reason why we can't recognize the legitimacy of Maduro as president.
All right. I mean, it is, you know, they did make a statement, but don't you feel like, I'll ask you this, Mark, don't you feel like it's a bit lukewarm, this response from the EU? Because we know that 4 European countries were calling strongly for this, but we had other countries, Austria, Greece, Italy, who did not actually want this. So how can the EU be taken seriously when they can't even agree on what foreign policy to pursue?
Well, it shows, indeed, it shows how divided the EU is on this matter again, with some member states issuing other statements. Now, the statement of the EU in itself, I think it was wise.
Okay.
I don't think it's wise to put an ultimatum right away if you want to solve this in a diplomatic way.
So you're okay
but
that
ultimately,
it's
yes,
okay.
and ultimately, yes, and elections will have to be held because power has to be legitimized.
But the calls, the ultimatum, so to say, has been established not by the EU itself, but by a few member states who have more at stake there. In my own country, Portugal, we have about 500,000 binationals, Portuguese Venezuelans, are also backing that position. Of course, we cannot overlook the overall context where other countries, not just the US, Canada, a lot of other Latin American countries also took a very clear position. And it's about indeed recognizing who is legitimate and then, of course, also providing the means for that legitimacy to be translated. One crucial thing will be this possibility that the money that the US is paying to Venezuela and that has been sustaining Maduro will actually be diverted to Guaido.
Okay.
This is critical. If Maduro's all about the money, it's a mafia state.
Sure.
And if they don't get this, what can Europe do in the end? Because we have to issue another declaration to say, hold your elections, and then what? Another declaration say, hold your elections. We have to have some teeth in this game, and that's nowhere in sight yet. So lining up these other nations, the three which are outstanding at the moment, Europe has been led essentially by Sanchez at the moment, above Spain, and they've got to get a real game plan. It's going to take months, if not years, to land this, and probably not softly either.
Okay, well, we were talking about, funding, and I think this is a very important topic to touch on because the EU has given aid to Venezuela for more than 2 decades now. Here's a look at just how much money the bloc has sent. For Venezuela's migration crisis, the EU sent 35 million euros in June and announced last month that they would send another 20 million. 40 million was allocated between 2007 and 2013 for modernization and diversification of its economy. 63.8 million was earmarked between 2000 and 2006 for technical financial cooperation as well as reconstruction. So there you see the EU's contribution to the Venezuelan economy. And there is this,
It's tiny.
It is tiny, but if you look at the EU's role, I'm just looking at the EU's role in global policy, it's usually a payer rather than a player. This has been quoted before.
But in the case of Venezuela, it's somewhat different because of the importance of our own European communities in Venezuela. I mentioned the Portuguese, the Spaniard, of course, the Italian, and so on. And I think the position of the EU is very important at this moment to indeed make the minds concentrate, and namely the minds of the military in Venezuela concentrate, because that's what is going to decide what's going to happen in Venezuela by the people of Venezuela. And probably the top levels of the Venezuelan army, who are mostly narco-traffickers, are, of course, continuing to be aligned with Maduro. But Guaido needs to ensure, indeed, the support of the other levels, and that's what will be determining.
And we've already seen mutiny as well. The military and the police forces have both demonstrated...
There are signs of mutiny.
Yeah, and not small mutinies. The whole squads in certain areas have been shown their clear opposition and willing to go to prison in opposition to Maduro.
And what I've been told is that actually Maduro now is putting military squads, special forces, to go after the neighborhoods collectives who earlier were supporting him and now have turned for
and don't forget
Guaido.
the possible meddling of Russia and Russian mercenaries.
That's another ball game, and it's there, of course, because it's the standoff between Russia and the US.
We're talking about, you're saying that the EU is interested in Venezuela because of the citizens living there, and the money that you were talking about is small compared to what other countries would be giving in. But I would like to ask the criticism of the EU, where it always just follows the lead of the United States. Do you think it's valid in this case? Okay, Alan doesn't agree, but what do you think?
No, because, well, Trump was the first to recognize the opposition leader immediately. Now, for me, it is also not clear what strategy he has. No. Because what if Maduro just stays in power? What will they do then?
And there's this angle with Russia, of course.
Yeah, very quickly, because you mentioned meddling. Is this meddling as well by the EU?
But what I think is... The state of the opposition in Venezuela is also pretty disorganized. And I think that the emergence of Guaido changes the game. And in this respect, I think that the EU, this was not uncoordinated. And the EU and countries like Spain, for instance, have taken a very important lead in this process. And we want to keep it political and not to give rise to a bloodbath.
I think this is an opportunity for Russia to win some friends instead of creating more chaos where it doesn't really get a tangible benefit at the end. Russia should be on the side of Europe to manage the situation.
It seems now when it comes to Venezuela, so many countries are interested in what lies ahead for Venezuela. All right, now let's move on now, because closer to home here in France, France's battle with the Yellow Vest protesters entered its 11th consecutive weekend this Saturday. Thousands of people marched through the capital. And one day later, on Sunday, the streets were still full, but this time demonstrators were wearing a different color. Let's take a look. France's Yellow Vest protesters have commanded Europe's attention for months. The demonstrations going hand in hand with the arrival of the weekend. They've proven themselves unstoppable, despite ongoing efforts from those in power. But the unrest has repeatedly turned violent, which is too much for some to accept. So they've started their own protests, wearing red scarves and bright blue vests. The two counter-groups say the Yellow Vests don't speak for them. Exhausted with the current climate and angry at the chaos, they filled the rainy streets yesterday to say enough is enough. With 10,000 people attending, could these be the new colors of discontent in France? Okay, first there was yellow and now there is red and blue. What does this signify? Do you think a change?
I haven't seen it.
Looking at French, looking at red.
I've just returned from Nicaragua, so I wasn't aware of this.
So there is this recent twist, like, you're wearing a red scarf.
So I also returned from Nicaragua, but I believe that
it's interesting, isn't it?
It's very dangerous, the polarization of society. That's what populists want, this polarization. But definitely, people have serious complaints against the growing inequalities, against the disenfranchising from politics that many politicians show by actually catering to private interests instead of the interests of the community.
Macron's able to divide a large part of the opposition into smaller groups. This is damaging.
Is this a divide and conquer, or it's bad for him?
I would go as far as to say that Macron has organised this opposition. But this is look at who this is peeling votes away from Marine Le Pen far faster than it's touching Macron. So the left is very divided in France. We may not even see any socialist MPs.
But in terms of demographics, when you look at the red scarves and blue vests, is there a difference with the yellow vest? Because that was a topic of discussion.
I don't think we know exactly yet.
Okay.
And I would be happy to predict that this movement will again be hijacked by anarchists who will use the opportunity to cause chaos in the streets, which will delegitimize any future protest in this direction.
They do say it is apolitical, though. This movement is apolitical.
They all say it's apolitical.
That's true.
It's all about
none of you believe that.
It's very political, all of them, and they should be, and it should be assumed it is political. It may not be party politics, but it is as well.
Yeah, as long as it's peaceful, of course.
But yes, of course. But there are genuine complaints of the population, and genuine, and they need to be heard by Macron and by the other European leaders.
The Gilets jaunes in particular, they aren't so much interested in a whole big policy change. They want to be recognized and they want to be listened to. And if the government, Macron, can really show that he's listening to the French people, he's going to take a lot of heat out of this debate.
I mean, and look at how taxation is top of their agenda, as we do had it here in the...
You have to leave it at that for now, because it's been going on for 11 weeks. It is going to continue even more. And another story that has been going on for quite some time, 2 years now, is Brexit. All right, it's going to be a big Brexit week again as Theresa May tries to get MPs on her side to support her Brexit deal and to vote on the amendments tomorrow at the Parliament, at the British Parliament. But we will be right back with you after a short break. Welcome back to Raw Politics. Now, in the effort to promote gender equality in Europe, the EU has a new idea. For the first time, it will recognize the right to take paternity leave. Now, that directive is designed to encourage men and women to take a more equal share in family life. So what would this mean in practice? Fathers or second parents in all EU member states will be guaranteed the right to take 10 days paid leave. The pay would be set at an equal level to EU maternity leave. And a new principle of carers leave will also be established, allowing workers caring for a family member to take 5 days of leave. All right, joining me now to talk paternity leave is spokesperson on this directive for the Socialists and Democrats group, Belgian MEP Maria Arena. And we also have Veronique Willems, Secretary General of SME United, the Association of Small and Medium Businesses in Europe. And still with us is Brian McQuarrie. He's a reporter, broadcaster at Euractiv. All right, this is a really interesting topic. But first of all, I'd like to ask, it took a long time for the EU to get here. Is the EU a bit of a dinosaur when it comes to equal family caring rights and raising children?
No, it's really difficult to put all these countries to agree themselves on what is it possible to do for this equality between men and women. And the situation in different countries are so different that we have to compromise and to find a way to facilitate this equality, but not to have too much burden for these countries that are far from the model that we want to have in Europe. So it was not easy to have this compromise.
So it is a compromise. Do you think that the EU did not go far enough? I'll ask you this, Brian. 2 weeks, that's it.
I think this is a modest shift in direction. I don't think it's enough. I think it does send the right messages, and I completely agree with Maria that this is about affordability. The countries have to be able to afford this, and I think Europe can do a lot more to facilitate that. So I would like to see them be more ambitious in that direction, show where the money is to help move this along, because it's good for the economy. This is not something which hurts the economy, and that's the easy argument for the opposition to make.
What is good for the economy? Giving paternity leave?
Yeah, paternity leave, because it means that the care for the children can be split between the mothers and the fathers. So women can stay in the labour force more easily, more readily, should they choose to do that. And also fathers can play a much more intrinsic part in the upbringing of their children as well. Now, that's something that carries on later in life as well. So we disenfranchise women by not allowing men to participate in the childcare as well. I've taken paternity leave. I've played a role in this. It's a great thing for the father to be involved in this. And Europe should be more ambitious, but let's find the money for it.
Before I go to Veronique, I'd like to bring up the numbers, because you did mention that it's very difficult to group all the countries together because the numbers are so different in different countries. Let's take a look at the level of paternity leave offered across the EU. So Finland, it tops the list at 9 weeks, while Croatia, Germany, Italy, Slovakia currently do not offer any paid paternity leave. And across the EU, 90% of fathers still do not use their parental leave. And I mean, it might surprise people that even Germany, I think countries like Germany don't offer any form of paid paternity leave as well. So I think that is an interesting point to raise. I'd like to bring Veronique to the conversation, because when it comes to small and medium-sized enterprises, is this something that is doable for SMEs to offer paid paternity leave to their employees?
Well, from our point of view, the proposal that was put forward by the European Commission last year, and it's also been shown in the feedback on the impact assessment, costs for SMEs were not taken into account when putting forward the proposal. The cost for economy is, however, still there. If you see at the moment, we have already 4 semesters in a row SMEs putting forward that lack of skilled staff is a huge problem for them, not allowing them to grow, not allowing them to provide offers that they get from customers. If we then see the number of leaves increasing every day, of course our entrepreneurs get very concerned. On top of that, the directive also provides for flexible working arrangements, which of course makes it also more difficult for the entrepreneur to puzzle everything into each other. And that then has also a negative impact on the work-life balance of the entrepreneur themselves, because everything that hasn't been done by workers who have flexible working arrangements or have leave falls on the entrepreneur themselves.
That's an interesting
I've done both these sides. So my first daughter was born, I was a full-time contract, permanent employment.
Sure.
Easy thing to do. Second daughter, 2 years later, I was full-time entrepreneur, the startup business as well. That's really tough. But you have to be able to offer work-life balance, and the productivity in the longer term and how we work as a society has got to change, because if we want to see creative talent and we want to see a balanced society and take care of it, we need to find...
Speaking of the balanced society, I just want to ask you, Anna, because we said 90% of men don't actually take the leave. Even if they can, they don't. So should it be made compulsory, in fact, if we're to promote social equality? I don't know.
In fact, it was my proposal
to make it compulsory.
It was my proposal, but it was not.
So for the men to take it, or for the companies to offer it?
For the men to take it.
For the men to take it.
But it was really too difficult to achieve this with the different member states. So what we have now is to be sure that this paternity leave is well paid. Because why men are not taking this paternity leave? It's because they have not a sufficient payment for this paternity leave. So if they are not paid for this, they are not going to take it. So it's important to have the paternity rights, paternity leave, but also to give the opportunity to these men to give this paternity being paid for it. And it is 10 days being paid. just to be with the children that they have. And I think it's important not only for the economy, it's important for our society. I think that we have to have this balanced way of living your private life and living your professional life. So I understand that sometimes it's difficult for the economy, but at least in the long term, it is not a cost for the economy, because also if you have this shared family task between men and women, you will have as economy more women being
this is the most important part.
more ready.
I would like to add on that one.
Very quickly, because we don't have much time.
It's not only about leave. You also have other systems, and I agree it's more to the member state level, but what we have been pleading for also as SME United is that we have more support structures in place, childcare facilities, help in the household and those elements that can also support persons who choose to work instead of take a leave, to also be in their company, and apart from that also have a work-life balance.
I mean, this is always the case, right? When we're trying to implement big social change, it's the cost. Who's going to pay for it? Can it be afforded? Very interesting topic indeed. All right, we'll move on to another story that obviously we have been covering and will continue to do so, Brexit, because I was saying earlier, it is a massive week, again, for Theresa May as she tries to get support for her deal, where MPs are going to vote tomorrow on the amendments. We have our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, in London for us. Darren, what can we expect?
Yes, you say another significant week for Brexit, another week in which the House of Commons behind me will vote on various options. A couple of weeks ago, of course, they roundly rejected Theresa May's deal. We know what they don't want, but what do they want? And MPs tomorrow will vote, as I say, on a series of amendments ranging from essentially extending Article 50 through to trying to get rid of this backstop, or at least have it changed to give Theresa May a mandate to go back to the European Union and Brussels for some type of renegotiation. Let's bring in one British MP. He is with the Labour opposition here at Wes Streeting, and someone who I think is very much campaigning or backing that amendment tomorrow to extend Article 50. But why are you doing that, Wes?
Well, the first thing that we need to do is build some consensus in Parliament around a deal that we can agree with the European Union. Theresa May's deal went down to a crushing historic defeat, so we can put that to one side. There are a number of other options being put forward by MPs, including a Norway-style agreement, and you know, I think our job as legislators is to try and show the European Union that some consensus can be built around a whole number of options. The Labour Party is talking about a customs union arrangements. Cross-party MPs are talking, as I said, about Norway. And the problem is that we have a stubborn and intransigent Prime Minister who is so wedded to her dead deal that she is preventing Parliament from having a more mature, grown-up conversation about where we can build consensus. So we've got big amendments tomorrow, the amendment to extend Article 50 to give us the time that we need, as well as other options.
Why are you backing that, though? Why do you think there needs to be essentially an extension to Article 50?
Well, we do need time. I think the EU will not unreasonably say we will give you an extension for a specific purpose. I think we've got to be clear that our objective is to agree a deal that can command the support of a majority of MPs. We've got to be upfront with the EU about what that deal would look like. That's why another amendment by Dominic Grieve, which would give MPs the chance to actually set the agenda, to put forward options, to vote on options over the course of the next couple of weeks, would be really important. Amendment 2. And then, of course, there are people like me who are arguing that whatever Brexit deal we finally agree within Parliament with the European Union, we have a moral democratic duty to put that deal to the British public with an option to remain. And I think the European Union, if convinced that the Parliament behind us can agree a deal, and certainly if we were going to put that deal to the people, the option to remain would give us the time and space we need to do that.
Just finally, we've heard today from some of Britain's biggest supermarkets, from some of the fast food chains like McDonald's, saying that no deal will be really devastating in terms of the food supply here in the UK. But people don't seem to believe this. They seem to think it is still part of Project Fear, don't they?
Well, I think to some extent, cynics about this have got a point, not because what businesses are saying is untrue. In fact, a no deal would be absolutely catastrophic for our country. The reason why I think people are right to be cynical is that surely no responsible Prime Minister would ever allow Britain to go off a cliff. In fact, Few things have automatic consensus in Parliament behind us, but stopping a no deal is something that commands the support of the vast majority of MPs. The only person who's pushing this at the moment is our irresponsible Prime Minister, who's basically saying it's my deal or no deal. She's assuming that by blackmailing MPs to vote for her deal, that we'll do that to offset the risk of no deal. I think she's wrong. I think she's irresponsible, and she's squandering billions of pounds of taxpayers' money on this flight to fancy, as well as, you know, we've got stupid scenarios like calling up our army reservists to do what? Raid France for bread and cheese. And this is not serious, responsible government, and that's why Parliament needs to assert control over the Brexit process here on.
We're streaking, a Labour opposition MP here in Britain. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on Raw Politics. Tessa, these votes are going to start tomorrow evening, we reckon around 7 o'clock local time, a whole series of amendments to be voted on. But there is still that possibility that none of those amendments will get a majority in this Parliament either. And where does that leave Britain? Well, you know, in the same gridlock position that it has been for the last couple of months.
Indeed, Darren, the saga continues. And thank you for that to Darren McCaffrey in London. And just to remind our viewers that tomorrow Euronews will have live coverage of that vote, so do stick around. All right, coming up on Raw Politics, mid-more on Brexit, wondering what a hard Irish border would look like after Brexit. Protesters in Ireland have a preview, and they're warning that this demonstration could turn into a reality. Plus, should Brexit be delayed? We want to hear from you. Stick around at 7 p.m. CET for your chance to call in and tell us what's on your mind. We do want to hear from you. The contact information is on your screen. The phone number is 00800 3333 7002 or email us at rawpoll@euronews.com. Do join the debate on Twitter and Facebook. Use the hashtag #RawPolitics. Do stay with us. Welcome back to Raw Politics. Now, you've seen a lot of our discussions here, but as always, what we really want is to hear your thoughts on all the topics that we are covering today. So your call is after Raw Politics tonight at 7 p.m. And the topics that we will be asking you are, first of all, should Brexit be delayed? This is a question I think is very hard to answer. Also, should paternity leave be mandatory? And finally, we also want to ask you, have adults failed the youth when it comes to safeguarding the environment? Now, you can see those questions on your screen. So again, should Brexit be delayed? Now, this is on the back of, obviously, Theresa May still trying to get that support from her MPs on her Brexit deal, you know, trying to see whether or not she can get her deal through. We want to hear your thoughts. So the contact information, we will bring it up on your screen now. It's 00800 3333 7002. And you can email us at rawpoll@euronews.com. You can also use the hashtag #RawPolitics on Twitter and Facebook, or you can look for us on Skype or look for any of us on Twitter as well. I mean, we'll post all the information for you as well. All right, joining me tonight for your call is British Labour MEP Richard Corbett. And we also have Shona Murray, our Brussels correspondent. And staying with us still is Brian McGuire. He's a reporter for Euractiv. All right, so the questions that we asked, we showed them on your screen earlier. So the first one is, should Brexit be delayed? I think a lot of the businesses, they're praying for an extension of Article 50. But this is obviously one side of the argument. So we want to know, what do you think? Should Brexit be delayed? Do call us in for your answer to that question. Okay, Shona, what else are we talking about again?
Should paternity leave be mandatory? Should men be forced to take it? What if they don't want to? What if the women want to use those 10 days themselves, the mothers that is? Or should the state pay for it, seeing as it's the citizens of the future? Or should companies also be obliged to put something towards it? That might not go down well with some small and medium enterprises. But I suppose the idea is that, culturally speaking, it's about motivating men to take their fair share, so it's not always burdensome for women.
I think that's really true. Okay, Brian, we're talking about something else.
Climate protesters.
Yes.
Climate protesters. We're going to be talking about whether Europe's politicians have failed the younger generation on the climate. They're failing everybody, but is it specifically about the young generation? And these protests that we've seen, 35,000 Belgian school kids out on the street, this is something quite exceptional. So we want to hear, do you think Europe's politicians have failed the young generation when it comes to climate?
Right, Richard, which of these topics are you looking forward to answering?
Well, not be talking about the Brexit one, but there's some similarities there, because in Britain it's the younger generation that feels that the older generation has let them down by voting for Brexit. So.
That's a really interesting comparison to make. Again, we want to know your thoughts on all of this. Let's bring up that contact information again, because we do want to hear from you. So the phone number is 00800-3333-7002, and the email is rawpaul@yournews.com. The questions that you can see are on your screen again. Should Brexit be delayed? Should paternity leave be mandatory? Have adults failed the youth? So these are the questions we are asking you, and we really would like to know what you think about them. So again, the number to call is 00800-3333-7002. I think I've had it in my head now. You can go to my Twitter feed. All the information is there, or it's up on your screen. We'll be waiting for your call definitely tonight. All right, we do have time for our raw moment tonight. It comes from the Irish border from Northern Ireland. So if you want to know what the hard border would look like, this is what some people think it might look like. I mean, that was a mock reenaction of, you know, if there were a hard border. I mean, you have two Irishmen here, Irish women. What do you
there
think?
was a hard border, and it didn't look too dissimilar to that.
It was very, very like
and we had the Irish Prime Minister say just last week, you know, get ready for some sort of armed guards, police on the border. So I think it's actually a very important demonstration to show people how things can escalate.
Especially for people who've never seen it. All right, we do want to hear from you, as I keep repeating, because your call is right after Raw Politics. Thank you for joining us tonight, and see you again soon.